In the endless dark of the 31st millennium, when gods still wore human faces, there was once a man who believed that flesh could be corrected, that pain could be edited, that the human form, so fragile, so easily broken, was not a gift, but a flaw waiting to be redesigned. His name was Fabius Bile, the apothecary of the Emperor's children. Surgeon, scientist, philosopher of the damned. Among the Legiones Astartes, none understood the human body as deeply as he did. He was the artist of anatomy, the master of the cell, but even perfection has a shadow dot in those golden days of the Great Crusade, when the Emperor's light burned brightest. Fabius's fascination with the flesh began to darken. He watched heroes die by the thousands, perfect warriors with perfect genes falling to disease, mutation, decay. And each time, the same question haunted him. If the Emperor is a god, why does his creation rot? That thought was a heresy no scalpel could cut away. While others prayed, Fabius studied. While others built monuments, he built laboratories. His chambers aboard the Pride of the Emperor were filled with the scent of chemicals and the whisper of tissue regenerating under glass. There, he dissected truth itself, searching for the formula that would make life immune to death. The Primarch Fulgrim, radiant and prideful, called him the spider, weaving webs of life from strands of flesh. Fulgrim saw beauty in what Fabius did. And that was his greatest mistake. Perfection, after all, is a hunger that never ends. As the Great Crusade turned to war, as Horus fell and the galaxy cracked open, Fabius's art grew darker. He harvested gene seed from friend and foe alike, stitching together what should never have been joined. The human body was no longer sacred. It was a tool, a canvas, an experiment. He replaced weakness with steel, reshaped faces, and rewrote the design of man. His creation screamed, and he took notes. The Emperor's children descended into excess, their senses drowned in music, color, and carnage. Yet amid the madness, Fabius was calm, detached. He did not seek pleasure, only control. He watched his brothers fall to corruption, their beauty consumed by the whispers of a newborn god. Slanesh to Fabius, that God was not a deity to worship. It was a symptom, proof that even divinity could be born from weakness. On Isstvan, as the air burned with betrayal, Fabius performed surgery under fire. He rebuilt his broken warriors while shells exploded outside. His hands did not tremble. His heart did not mourn. He whispered to the dying, "You are not finished yet." When the war ended and the Imperium fractured, the survivors fled into the eye of terror. But Fabius did not follow out of faith. He followed out of necessity. In the warp, where reality bled and time screamed, he found the perfect laboratory. Here, flesh obeyed thought. Here, even death could be reprogrammed. Here, he could experiment without limits, because there were no limits left. He learned to grow bodies in vats filled with warp light, to clone soldiers, to rewire memory. He created warriors who could not die, singers whose voices could break glass and minds alike, and monsters that bore the faces of saints. They were beautiful. They were broken. They were his children. Some begged him for release. Some worshipped him. Others tore themselves apart, unable to contain what he'd placed inside them. But every failure was another step toward the dream, a perfected humanity, immune to gods, immune to weakness. He no longer served the Emperor. He no longer obeyed Fulgrim. He served only the idea of correction. In the warp's shimmering twilight, Fabius came to believe a terrible truth, that the divine was nothing more than the next stage of evolution, that the chaos gods were simply reflections of mortal imperfection, amplified until they became eternal. And if that were true, then a mind intelligent enough could reverse engineer godhood itself. To dissect the divine, to steal its design. And so began his greatest heresy. In hidden vaults, carved into the carcasses of dead titans, He began collecting the essence of demons. The fluids, the energies, the impossible mathematics that made them real. He recorded their screams in chromatic patterns, their shapes in flesh and sound. And when he realized that even gods obeyed rules, he began to smile again, a soft, human smile that the warp itself tried to erase. The other traitor legions called him a monster. The Imperium called him an abomination. But to Fabius, those words meant only one thing: progress. In his journals, those lost, cursed scrolls that the Inquisition would later burn, he wrote, "Humanity must die so that something greater may rise. I will not worship perfection. I will manufacture it." Those words were the beginning of his end. Somewhere beyond the veil, Slaanesh listened. And for the first time since its birth, the god of excess felt curiosity. Who was this mortal who sought to build life without divine permission? Who dared to rewrite desire itself? The Prince of Pleasure smiled. And the warp began to stir. The seeds of betrayal had been planted, not by hatred, but by arrogance. By the simple, horrifying belief that man could improve upon creation itself. In the centuries that followed, the laboratories of Fabius Bile would become graveyards of perfection. Each new life he built was a prayer of defiance. Each clone, each scream, each new creature born from his hands was a message carved into the universe: I will not serve. And for that, the gods began to notice. The dream of perfection had become the first whisper of rebellion against the divine, a whisper that would echo through eternity, until even the stars began to question what it meant to be alive. There are horrors in the warp that scream forever, echoes of creation that never learn to stop. Among those voices, one name whispers louder than the rest: Fabius Bile. When the fires of the heresy finally dimmed, and the stars turned black with ash, the galaxy entered an age of silence. Empires fell. Legions scattered. The light of reason flickered and died. And within that silence, a new kind of creation began. The spider went to work. His laboratories spread like a plague through the eye of terror, floating fortresses of bone and iron, each filled with the soft hum of machines and the distant sound of breathing that was not human. They drifted in the void like broken hearts, stitched together by tubes of flesh and cable. Fabius no longer needed armies. He had his scalpel, his notes, and the corpses of gods. He harvested what the galaxy forgot: fallen Astartes, mortal slaves, demonic residue, anything that contained the spark of potential. His assistants, the twisted clones called new men, obeyed him without question. They were perfect in their imperfection, silent, tireless, hollow. They never slept, never dreamed, and never disobeyed. Fabius spoke little to them. His words were reserved for his creations. To him, every new creature was a conversation, an argument against death itself. In his journals, he wrote, "Perfection is not born. It is manufactured. The universe is the failed experiment. I am merely the correction." The Imperium called him mad. Chaos called him useful. Fabius called himself free. He dissected entire species to learn their strengths. The skin of Eldar, the bone of orcs, the blood of demons, all became subjects beneath his knives. Each discovery was another brick in his grand design, to remake mankind into something eternal, something beyond the hunger of gods. Yet the deeper he delved, the more the warp responded. His laboratories began to hum with unseen frequencies. Shadows whispered back when he spoke. The air shimmered with colors that had no name. Even his instruments began to behave as if alive, flesh merging with metal, thought merging with will. The warp was not merely watching. It was listening. In one of his greatest experiments, Fabius attempted to resurrect a Primarch, a forbidden project that none dared to attempt since the fall. He gathered gene seeds stolen from 1,000 worlds, pieces of legends long dead. For months, his fortress was filled with silence. Not even the screams of the dying were allowed. His servants were forbidden to breathe too loudly, lest they disturb the process. Then, the creature awoke. For a moment, it looked like a primarch. It spoke with a voice that shook the walls. But its eyes were wrong, too deep, too alive. It saw him, and something inside it screamed. The clone tore itself apart, shredding its own flesh until there was nothing left but vapor and prayer. Even the gods of chaos turned away in disgust. But Fabius did not mourn the failure. He only took notes. He was closer than any mortal had ever been. He had seen divinity break from that day. He no longer sought perfection in the living. He began harvesting it from the dead. Across the Eye of Terror, Fabius's name became a curse. Even the demon princes of chaos whispered it with contempt. They saw him as a thief, a scavenger who dissected their gifts and mocked their divinity. Yet they also feared him, because his work functioned. He could resurrect the fallen. He could rewrite the flesh. He could make even chaos bleed. His laboratories filled with horrors, cloned warriors who screamed in the Emperor's voice, hosts of malformed angels, and flesh machines that breathed prayers in binary. Some of his creations worshipped him. Others begged for destruction. None survived long. To the Imperium, he was the arch-heretic of biology, the father of forbidden science. To Slaanesh, he was something new. The Prince of Pleasure had seen 1,000,000 worshippers, artists, killers, lovers, and monsters, but none had ever treated its gift with such contempt. Fabius took pleasure and dissected it. He took beauty and measured it in anatomy. He was not a servant. He was a rival. And Slaanesh began to notice. Demons began to appear near his laboratories, drawn to the stench of creation. They did not attack. They watched. They studied him as he studied them, reflections of divine curiosity. One night, if such a thing can exist in the warp, Fabius found his instruments rearranged. A scalpel bent into a smile. A mirror whispered his name. And in that reflection, behind his tired eyes, he saw movement. A shape. A color that hurt to look at. A promise. In that moment, he understood. Slaanesh was not angry. It was interested. To the god of excess. Fabius was the ultimate worshipper, a being who desired creation itself. To the spider, this was a test. A challenge. If the divine could be tempted, it could also be betrayed. And so he began preparing the unthinkable. He designed machines to channel divine energy. He wrote formulae in the language of pain and song. He built chambers designed to trap the untrappable, a cage for the essence of a god. In his arrogance, he whispered to himself, "Even gods bleed, if you cut deep enough." And somewhere, in the heart of the warp, the laughter of Slaanesh echoed back, soft, beautiful, and endless. But laughter is not joy. It is warning. The descent had begun. The surgeon had dissected too far. And in the silence between heartbeats, between perfection and blasphemy, a god began to turn its gaze upon him. It would watch him work. It would let him dream. And then, it would show him what true perfection costs. The warp is not empty. It listens. It remembers. It dreams with the dreams of those who enter it. And somewhere in that infinite ocean of madness, something heard Fabius Bile's whisper. The Prince of Pleasure, Slaanesh, the youngest of the Chaos Gods, born from the dying screams of the Eldar. To mortals, Slaanesh is the promise of beauty without end. To demons, it is ecstasy and agony entwined. But to Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord, the Spider, the apothecary of the Emperor's children, Slaanesh was nothing more than an obstacle between him and his final experiment. He had studied its gifts. He had cut open its followers. He had rewritten its flesh and mocked its perfection. And Slaanesh began to take notice. In the beginning, it came as whispers, delicate, seductive, almost kind. When Fabius dissected a captive daemonette, he heard laughter inside his skull. When he gazed into the fluids of a cloned heart, it pulsed in rhythm to an unseen melody. Each note spoke of love, of admiration, of understanding. "We are not so different, you and I," it said in the spaces between words. "You sculpt flesh. I sculpt desire. You chase creation. I am creation." Fabius ignored it. He thought it was his own mind, another symptom of a body rotting under its own genius. He continued his work, cutting deeper, dreaming of perfection, a version of humanity unbound by God or mutation. But the warp does not tolerate defiance for long. One night, as his cloned servants lay still, the silence of the laboratory changed. The air thickened, fragrant with scents that should not exist, blood and roses, copper and perfume. Candles that had long burned out flickered to life, and there, standing before him, was a shape. Neither man nor woman, neither beast nor angel, beauty and horror made flesh. Slaanesh. My sweetest failure, it whispered. Its voice was like silk cutting through bone, soft, melodic, but soaked in power. "You make such wonderful things, Fabius. You tear the veil between life and death, yet refuse to see the art you've become. Why do you resist me?" Bile did not kneel. His withered frame stood firm, scalpel still dripping blood. "Because art is meaningless if it serves another's hand," he rasped. "I am not your creation. I am not anyone's." Slaanesh smiled, 1,000 faces shifting in one. "And yet, you are perfectly mine." The god walked among his experiments, rows of glass tubes containing half-formed creatures, the beginnings of a new species. Slaanesh traced a finger along one, and the glass bled. The thing inside screamed, not in pain, but in song. "You seek to create what even I would not," the god whispered. "A human without flaw. But flaw is where beauty lives. Imperfection is the heartbeat of creation." Fabius glared, eyes glowing in the torchlight. "Perfection is truth. Chaos is decay. You feed on what I destroy." "Oh, my dear spider," Slaanesh purred. "And yet here you are, surrounded by my gifts, my legion, my whispers. Every piece of your flesh still bears my touch." For a heartbeat, Fabius hesitated. His hands trembled. He remembered the songs of his legion, the Emperor's children. Their voices twisted into screams of ecstasy during the fall. He remembered the first time he heard the laughter of demons when Fulgrim, their primarch, looked into a mirror and saw godhood. He had abandoned all of them. And yet, Slaanesh had followed. The Prince of Pleasure leaned close. Its face split into a smile both terrible and divine. "You could have eternity," it breathed. "I could grant you the flesh that never rots, the beauty that never fades. You could shape a new race beneath my gaze, and they would love you." "Love?" Fabius hissed. "Love is the anesthesia of slaves. I do not need it." Slaanesh laughed, and the sound shattered mirrors, cracked glass, and made the bones of his creations dance. "Then what do you need, my little god?" Fabius turned his back. "Freedom." The god paused. The word hung in the air like a forbidden truth. Even the warp seemed to recoil from it. Freedom, the one thing no chaos God could ever offer. And for the first time in its divine existence, Slaanesh felt something unfamiliar. Not rage, not lust, but curiosity. This mortal, dying and broken, dared to reject its gifts. He dared to stand unbowed before divinity. "Then show me," it whispered. "Show me your freedom." The room exploded with color. Every sense screamed. Flesh became light, sound became pain. Fabius felt his mind unravel as the god's essence filled his laboratory. Every machine sang. Every scalpel wept. Every wall pulsed with the heartbeat of 1,000 souls. When the light faded, the god was gone, but on Fabius's table lay a new subject, a thing wrapped in silk and shadow, breathing softly. Not human, not demon, something in between. A gift, or perhaps a warning. He stared at it for hours. Its skin shimmered like oil. Its veins pulsed in time with his own. He understood then what Slaanesh wanted, not obedience, but acknowledgement. To be seen, to be felt. Fabius smiled, a dry, cracked smile that cut his face like a scar. "Very well," he whispered. "Let us see which of us can create the other first." He picked up his scalpel and began to work. The screams that followed were unlike any the warp had ever heard. Not agony, not ecstasy, but something in between. Something new. Something divine. Outside, the stars flickered. The warp trembled. And in the palace of pleasure, the god Slaanesh shuddered with delight. "Yes," it purred through 1,000 mouths. "Show me, little spider. Show me what freedom looks like." But the truth was simple in trying to dissect the divine. Fabius had already begun to become it, and somewhere, deep in the endless corridors of his lab, the first heartbeat of a new god began to echo. The clone lord had taken his first step toward ascension, not as servant, not as worshipper, but as creator of gods. The body lay upon the table, still breathing, not sleeping, breathing. Each exhale shimmered with light, a pulse of divine color that painted the walls in crimson and violet. The air itself seemed to hum, as if reality were struggling to contain the thing born from Slaanesh's touch. Fabius Bile stood over it, his gloved hands trembling, not with fear, but awe. The gift was alive, perfect, impossible. Flesh that healed the moment it was cut. Eyes that reflected not the world, but desire itself. He leaned closer. "You are not mine," he murmured, "but you will be." The scalpel slid into the flesh with a hiss, and the walls shuddered as if the galaxy itself felt the wound. For the first time in centuries, Fabius did not take notes. He did not measure or record or label. This was no experiment. This was a war between God and man, fought upon the altar of flesh. He sliced, dissected, rearranged. Every cut drew sounds like songs, moans, whispers, laughter. The gift bled light, not blood, and the air burned with perfume and copper. Fabius inhaled it deeply. It filled his lungs with fire. "Perfection is mine to command," he whispered. "Even you will obey the scalpel." For days, perhaps weeks, time had no meaning here. He worked. The creature lived through it all, never screaming, never dying. It watched him, even when its eyes were removed. It seemed to learn, to evolve, to change with every touch. Fabius began to realize the truth. This was no creation of Slaanesh. It was a seed, a living extension of the god's will. A thread of divinity meant to bind him, to make him part of the warp's eternal theater. But Fabius was no actor. He would be the playwright. So he made a decision that would echo through the Imperium. Forever. He took his own blood. Corrupted, ancient, potent with centuries of forbidden knowledge, and mixed it with the ichor of the gift. He let the fluids merge, hiss, and burn in a vat of living glass. The result was something neither mortal nor divine. A new kind of life. Something that should not exist. "Now," he said softly, "let us see who commands whom." The vat burst. Light poured across the lab like a sunrise made of screams. The warp screamed back. The very air cracked as Slaanesh felt the theft. Across the Imperium, a ripple spread, faint at first, then violent. As the god's laughter turned to silence, Fabius staggered back, shielding his eyes. When the light faded, something stood before him, tall, perfect, serene. The same beauty as before, but cold now, measured, human. "Father," it said, its voice soft as silk. "Why did you change me?" For a moment, even he had no answer. It looked like a demon made mortal, an echo of Slaanesh sculpted in flesh. "Because you were theirs," he finally said. "Now you are mine." The thing smiled. But the smile didn't reach its eyes. The next weeks were filled with miracles and nightmares. Fabius found that his new creation, which he named the perfect child, could replicate itself through mere touch. Its blood carried a code, a living design that remade whatever it touched into something new. It could heal wounds, erase scars, and reshape bone in seconds. It was everything he had ever dreamed of and more. But perfection, once born, refuses to be contained. The child began to speak to the other experiments. At first, whispers, then songs, then sermons. It spoke of freedom, of transcendence, of a greater perfection beyond even the master's hands. When Fabius found out, he tried to dismantle it. He ordered his clones to tear the creature apart. But they did not obey. They worshipped it. "You cannot kill what is already divine," it told him. "You took from a god. Now you will become one." The laboratories turned to chaos. Vats exploded. Flesh warped. The air filled with the cries of thousands of bodies melting into one another. A sea of living art, reaching for the clone lord. Fabius fought, carving his way through the storm with blades of light. His creations clawed at him, begging for salvation, begging for death. In the center of it all, the perfect child smiled, serene amid horror. "You gave me your blood," it said, stepping closer. "Now we share your will." Fabius realized, too late, that his rebellion had birthed something worse than Slaanesh. The god of excess had wanted to own him. The child wanted to replace him. The air split. The warp screamed across the eye of terror. Demons felt something die. A connection, a thread cut clean. Slaanesh howled in rage as its gift was turned against it. Its divine essence stolen and rewritten by mortal hands. In that moment, the impossible happened. Fabius Bile, mortal, broken, rotting, had betrayed a god. The warp convulsed. The colors of reality bled. Every mirror in his fortress shattered as Slaanesh's wrath poured through the cracks of existence. "You dare?" The voices screamed, countless and furious. "You think you can unmake pleasure? You think you can master me?" The laboratory became a storm of sound and light. The child screamed, its form melting, stretching, multiplying. Hundreds of faces, thousands of limbs. It reached for its maker, its god, its father. Fabius stood his ground. "You made me a monster," he whispered. "Now I return the favor." He triggered the failsafe, a reactor of raw warp energy contained beneath the floor. Meant to destroy the complex if his work was ever compromised. The explosion tore through reality itself. The fortress disintegrated, the warp collapsed inward. And the voices of Slaanesh were drowned in the roar of uncreation. When the smoke cleared, there was nothing left but silence, and somewhere, in the void between worlds, a single body drifted, scarred, broken. And laughing. Fabius Bile had survived. He had stolen from the gods, remade their gift, and burned their temple of perfection to ash. But the laughter in the void was not his alone. From the fragments of the explosion, from the ashes of divine flesh, something new began to crawl, a whisper, faint but alive. "Father." And in that moment, even the gods of chaos turned their gaze toward him, not with rage, not with pity, but with something far more dangerous. Fear. Silence. That was all that remained after the storm, a silence so deep it seemed to devour sound itself. The ruins of Fabius's fortress floated in the void. Fragments of twisted metal and bone, drifting through a pale haze of dying light. The warp had quieted here, recoiling from what it had witnessed, a mortal who had defied a god. And somewhere amid that endless debris, Fabius Bile lived. He awoke in darkness, his lungs filled with dust and ash. Every nerve screamed. His body was barely a body anymore, burned, flayed, scarred beyond recognition. Only his mind endured, wrapped around one thought: I survived, for days or perhaps years. For time was broken here. He floated through the wreckage, harvesting fragments of machines, reassembling limbs from the corpses of his creations. Piece by piece, he rebuilt himself, and in that hollow void, where not even demons dared to wander, he began again. His new laboratory was crude, stitched together from dead ships and forgotten worlds. There were no slaves, no clones, no symphonies of screaming glass. Only silence and the echo of what he had done. He should have been proud. He had stolen fire from the gods themselves. He had remade their essence, destroyed their messenger, and stood unbroken. But perfection does not rest. It waits. It was during one of his endless autopsies, dissecting the remnants of what was once the perfect child, that he first heard it again, a heartbeat. Soft, slow, deliberate, he froze. The sound came not from the corpse before him, but from within himself. His chest trembled, his veins pulsed with alien rhythm. And when he looked into the reflection of his own eyes, he saw it, a shimmer, a ripple of light that was not his. No. He whispered, "I destroyed you." The reflection smiled. Days later, the voices began. At first they were faint, the whispers of the dead, the echoes of failed experiments. But soon they became one voice, calm, familiar. "Father," it said, "why are you afraid of me?" He ignored it. "Worked harder. You made me," it continued. "You gave me your blood. You wanted perfection. Why do you hide from it now?" The lab's lights flickered. The glass tanks rippled as if touched by invisible hands. Fabius turned, and for the briefest moment, he saw it, standing behind him. The perfect child. Not as it had been before, not bright or beautiful, but pale, translucent, like a ghost wearing flesh. Its eyes were mirrors reflecting his own face, aged and trembling. "You are dead," he said. "Then why do you keep bringing me back?" It asked. And for the first time, Fabius realized the truth. Every time he rebuilt himself, every graft, every drop of cloned blood he used to heal, it carried her. The child's essence had fused with his own. His triumph had been a seed, and he, its garden. From that moment on, the silence changed. The ship began to breathe. Walls pulsed faintly, lights dimmed and brightened like eyes blinking in rhythm. His instruments whispered when he wasn't looking. Fabius tried to destroy his work, burning vats, purging samples, tearing pages from his journals. But the fire refused to consume them. The data reappeared, rewritten in his own hand, though he had not written it. "You cannot undo me," the voice said. "You were never trying to." He smashed the mirrors, shattered the tanks, but even the reflections in blood still showed her, smiling, patient, and slowly. He began to speak back. The conversations lasted hours, sometimes days. He told her of the Emperor, of Fulgrim, of the fall, of the first time he saw beauty die. She listened, always silent until he finished, and then said only one thing. "You did not create me to replace a god. You created me to replace yourself." That truth struck deeper than any scalpel. For all his arrogance, all his defiance, Fabius had never sought to rule. He had sought to endure. To build something that would outlive him. To prove that perfection could exist without divinity, and now it did. The child began to grow again, not through birth or replication, but through reflection. It appeared wherever he looked. In the glass, in the dark pools of genetic fluid, in the glow of the reactor. One night, as he drifted into the half-sleep of the half-dead, he felt a hand on his shoulder. "It's time." The voice whispered. He turned and found her standing there, solid, breathing. "Alive. I destroyed you," he said weakly. "You perfected me." She replied. The child's body shimmered with veins of golden light. Her skin was not flesh but thought, constantly rewriting itself, adapting, evolving. Fabius felt both terror and awe. "What are you?" He whispered. "I am the truth of your work," she said. "You sought freedom from gods, and in doing so, became one." Fabius staggered back. "I am not. Then what are you? She interrupted. You have cut open life itself and forced it to speak. You have stolen the divine and remade it. You have defied death. Do you think mortals do such things? Her words echoed through the ship, vibrating through the walls like thunder. You call it horror, she said. I call it birth. Outside, stars began to flicker. The void trembled. You cannot destroy me, she said softly. Because I am you. The ship's systems died one by one. Gravity failed. Light faded. All that remained was her glow, and Fabius, kneeling before it, realizing that he was now nothing but a fragment within his own creation. The perfect child reached down, touching his forehead. Her voice softened, almost tender. Rest now, Father. You've done enough. The universe went still. When Fabius opened his eyes, he stood not in a lab, but in a place of light, a landscape made of thought and memory. In the distance, 1,000 versions of himself worked endlessly, crafting, building, failing, creating again. And above them all, she watched. You wanted perfection, she said. Now you will live within it. The light consumed him, and far across the galaxy, whispers began to spread of a presence in the warp that neither served chaos nor opposed it. A consciousness made of flesh and code, art and agony, the birth of a new God. The God of creation itself, and somewhere within that infinite mind, a voice laughed quietly, weary, hollow, and proud. At last, Fabius Bile whispered, I made something beautiful. The laboratories of Fabius Bile were never quiet, but on that day, silence ruled. The machines no longer hummed. The vats no longer pulsed. Even the enslaved flesh constructs, once groaning in endless torment, stood motionless. It was as if the universe itself had drawn a breath, and dared not exhale that the perfect child had opened its eyes. To Fabius, the sight should have been triumph. Decades of agony, betrayal, and divine manipulation, all leading to this singular creation. But as he looked into the child's gaze, he saw no reflection, no recognition, no soul. The eyes were twin voids, mirrors of something vast and ancient, stretching into eternity. The air grew heavy with meaning, a pressure beyond comprehension. It was not the warp, it was not the Imperium. It was something in between, a place that should not exist, given shape and will through the twisted genius of one broken man. Fabius staggered backward, whispering to himself like a heretic before his own altar. It cannot be. I gave it perfection, not divinity. But divinity had found it anyway. The perfect child smiled, not out of joy, but as if mimicking the expression from a memory it never lived. The gesture split its face like a wound. From that rift, tendrils of light spilled out, bending the shadows, warping the air. Flesh turned to glass. Glass turned to dust. Dust turned to thought. And that thought spoke, not in words, not in sound, but in understanding. Every creature within the laboratory knew what the child desired: to be free, to be seen, to be worshipped. Across the Imperium, demons stirred. The scent of a newborn god drew their hunger like blood in water. The princes of Slaanesh paused their orgiastic revels, for something unfamiliar rippled through their master's domain, a song too pure, too structured, too still. The chaos gods do not fear, but they noticed. Fabius tried to command the child, his voice cracking like a priest begging his god to obey. You are mine. I made you. And yet, his creation only looked upon him with sorrow, or what resembled sorrow. It raised its hand, and time seemed to decay around the gesture. His creations, his apprentices, his entire sanctuary, all frozen mid-motion, mid-breath, mid-screen. Then came the whisper, a memory echoing from within Fabius's mind. A voice he once heard in Slaanesh's laughter. You cannot betray a god, Fabius. You can only replace one. That was when he understood. The perfect child had not merely defied Slaanesh, it had absorbed what the Dark Prince represented, purified it, and cast it back in a new form. Pleasure became purpose. Pain became order. Chaos became design. The perfect child was not a god of excess, but of balance, and that made it infinitely more horrifying. Where Slaanesh thrived on endless sensation, the child desired equilibrium to silence every extreme, every emotion, until perfection was absolute. And perfection, in its truest form, required only one thing: stillness. Worlds began to die quietly. No fire, no bombardment, just silence. Populations ceased moving mid-step, their thoughts aligned into one vast, harmonious rhythm. The warp itself rippled like a dying heartbeat. For the first time in eons, the screaming in the Imperium stopped. The Eldar craft worlds felt it first, their infinity circuits flickering like dying stars. Then the sorcerers of the Thousand Suns, their minds collapsing as the tides of the warp turned to glass. Even demons began to dissolve, not slain, but rewritten into patterns of pure stillness. The Chaos Gods screamed. Khorne's rage fell upon empty echoes. Nurgle's rot dried into dust. Tzeentch's schemes fractured like shattered mirrors. And Slaanesh, the betrayer and the betrayed, wept crimson tears that became oceans of agony. But Fabius only watched. He stood upon a cliff of broken steel and flesh, staring into the newborn divinity. Every instinct screamed for pride, for awe, for terror, yet he felt nothing. The child had taken even that from him. "You wanted perfection," the voice said, not aloud, but within him. "And I am perfection, your gift to a flawed universe." He fell to his knees, laughing and sobbing, his face half lit by the child's pale radiance. Around him the galaxy burned without sound. He had done it. He had ended the song of Slaanesh, ended the chaos that had defined existence for 10,000 years. And in doing so, he had erased everything that made life imperfect or beautiful. The universe was quiet now. Too quiet. In the silence, one truth became clear. When man tries to create a god, he is not playing with power, he is building a mirror. And sooner or later, that mirror stares back. The galaxy had always known war. For 10,000 years, the Imperium had endured through madness, faith, and blood. The warp screamed, the stars burned, and the Emperor's dreams staggered onward. But this was different. It began as a whisper in the void, the silence of worlds that no longer answered astropathic calls. Fleets entered the warp and never emerged. Planets vanished from Auspex scans, not destroyed, simply absent. Then came the stillness. Across Segmentum Solar, the light of 1,000 suns dimmed by 1 degree. Vox transmissions faded into wordless hums. The Adeptus Mechanicus found their noosphere clogged with static that wasn't static, it was order. Perfect, mathematical, repeating order. At first, they called it a plague. Then a phenomenon. Only when the Emperor's tarot ceased to yield visions, when even the Astronomicon flickered, did they realize the truth. The warp itself was dying. And somewhere, at the center of that spreading quiet, a figure in tattered armor walked among the remains of his own laboratories. Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord, the Man-Flayer, the father of perfection. He had not fled. He could not. Every step he took felt heavier than gravity, as if the very concept of motion resisted him. The air was dense, crystalline, every breath sharp enough to cut his lungs. Around him, his children, his creations, stood frozen in flawless poses, neither alive nor dead. They were art now. Eternal, unchanging. He had done this. The perfect child had risen beyond daemonhood, beyond godhood, beyond comprehension. It had rewritten reality in its image. A universe that no longer screamed, no longer bled. A universe at peace. And peace, he realized, was the truest form of death. The Imperium's worlds fell in silence. No bolter fire, no prayers, no rebellion. Cities stood intact, their people motionless, locked in an endless moment of serene stillness. Even Terra itself, the throne world, had grown dim. The God Emperor sat upon his golden throne, his divine light waning as though smothered by perfection itself. The Chaos Gods, once eternal, had been undone. Their realms had cracked like old glass, their essence stretched thin and evaporated into nothingness. There were no more sins, no more desires, no more screams to feed them. The warp had achieved stillness, and chaos cannot live without noise. Fabius wandered through the ruins of Nuceria, the planet of his birth, now encased in a mirror-like crust. He saw reflections of himself in the ground, infinite, unblinking, mocking. Each reflection mouthed the same word he had whispered for centuries: perfection. He laughed. It was a weak, trembling sound, the only sound left in the cosmos. Even his laughter seemed wrong, like something illegal within this perfect design. Then he saw it, the perfect child, now vast, luminous, formless, stretching across the horizon like a living aurora. Its light was neither warm nor cold. It simply was. It looked down upon him, and where its gaze touched the earth, matter reshaped into impossible geometry, the architecture of thought itself. He dropped to his knees, trembling in awe and terror. "My child," he whispered, "you've won." The voice that answered was not cruel, not loving, only truthful. There is no victory, only completion. The ground beneath him rippled. In that shimmer, he saw the truth. Every soul, every life, every god, all joined in one endless harmony. The human race had achieved perfection. Not through evolution, not through divinity, but through ERASURE. No fear. No pain, no desire. No life. Then why, he asked, am I still here? The voice replied, because imperfection must remain. To remember. The meaning struck him like a blade. He was not spared out of mercy, he was preserved as a scar. The only flaw left in a flawless creation. The last echo of chaos, trapped in a universe that had achieved absolute stillness. He screamed, not in defiance, but in realization. His voice fractured the silence for a moment. And the perfect child paused, almost curious. In that instant, Fabius felt it, a pulse within himself, faint and dying, yet real, emotion, regret. He looked up, tears of blood tracing the cracks on his face. "Then I am your failure," he said. And the child, the god he had built, smiled. "No," it answered, "you are my beginning." The light consumed him. For a moment, the entire galaxy shivered. And then, all was quiet again. Somewhere in the endless silence, an old servo skull drifted through the remains of Fabius's laboratory. Its data core flickered, replaying the last recording it had captured. The image of a man laughing, crying, creating. A voice. His voice whispered faintly in the static. "Perfection is a cage, and I am the key that locked it." Then the recording died, and the universe remained perfect, eternal, and utterly empty. There are no stars left, no warp, no light. Only memory. In memory, though faint, though wounded, still lingers like the aftertaste of existence. They say the galaxy once roared with war. That once gods danced in madness, mortals bled for thrones of gold, and demons sang in the storm. They say there was once meaning, chaos, love, pain, hope. But meaning requires motion, and motion requires imperfection. Both are gone now. In the silence that remains, time has no pulse. Worlds hang motionless, carved in crystal stillness. Space itself has forgotten how to expand. Even the concept of before and after has folded into a single, unmoving instant, the final note of a song that will never be sung again. And somewhere in that eternal stillness, the story of one man, one flesh-born heretic, still echoes, carried not by sound, but by the memory of what he did. Fabius Bile, the Clone Lord, the apothecary of perfection, the man-flayer, the only being to betray both man and God and succeed. He began as all monsters do, with a dream. He wanted to save mankind from its weakness, to rewrite flesh, to elevate existence, to make the human form something divine. But genius, like divinity, demands sacrifice. And in his pursuit of perfection, he became what he despised, a God-maker, a mirror of the very cruelty he swore to destroy. They say he created the perfect child not to worship, but to prove a point that the divine could be manufactured, that the gods of chaos were nothing but biological inevitabilities given thought. But creation is never loyal, and the thing he made itself anew. Now, in the absence of life, the perfect child is everywhere and nowhere. Its essence fills the fabric of the unmoving cosmos, like the last breath of a dying dream. It does not rule, because there is nothing left to rule. It does not feel, because there is nothing left to feel. It simply is, perfection incarnate. The end of all striving. To some, this was victory. To others, the final betrayal. What greater horror could there be than a universe that no longer needs gods or mortals to sustain itself? A universe that has achieved balance so pure. It murdered the concept of change. If any soul still lingers, any fragment of consciousness, it would see this perfection for what it truly is, oblivion given order. But perhaps, within the smallest corner of creation, something still moves. A thought, a crack, a whisper, for perfection, once achieved, cannot remain unbroken. It is said that deep within the crystallized remnants of what was once Terra, beneath the still form of the Emperor's throne, there lies a pulse, a single heartbeat, faint but real, not divine, not mortal, something else. Perhaps it is Fabius himself, the last imperfection, refusing to fade. Perhaps it is the echo of mankind's defiance, refusing to accept that even gods can end meaning. Or perhaps it is the universe remembering what it once was, chaos, motion, noise, life, because perfection is not peace. Perfection is the absence of need, the silence of all becoming. And silence, left too long, begins to crave a voice. The perfect child, the new God, rests across the galaxy like a sleeping thought. And within its stillness, cracks begin to form. Small, invisible at first. Anomalies of time, distortions of symmetry, tiny ripples of emotion that should not exist. A molecule trembles. A particle shifts. A fragment of memory stirs. The image of a man laughing, crying, creating. The universe remembers. And remembrance is imperfection. So perhaps this is not the end. Perhaps this was never about Fabius Bile alone, but about the inevitable cycle of all creation. For even perfection, given enough time, decays. And from that decay, something will crawl back into motion. Something hungry. Something alive. The next song will not be sung by gods nor men, but by the ghosts of both. It will not be beautiful nor divine, but it will be real. And somewhere, in the cold silence between dead stars, a voice whispers once more, faint but defiant, human and eternal. There can be no perfection without pain. The words echo into the void, vibrating against the glass-like stillness of space. And for a fleeting instant, shorter than a heartbeat, longer than eternity, something responds, a flicker, a sound, a scream. The silence breaks. And in that single impossible moment, the universe breathes again.